The camera glides through the busy gates of Heathrow Airport, lights flickering across glass walls and silver luggage. The narrator's voice is calm, deliberate, the kind that makes you stop scrolling. Sometimes, justice doesn't roar, it whispers, until the world has to listen. Today's story isn't about power or wealth. It's about dignity and a 13-year-old girl who reminded an entire airline what fairness really means. Soft music swells under the hum of engines. A title flashes across the screen. Flight attendant removes black girl from first class. Seconds later, law forces flight to stop. London Heathrow shimmered in that early morning haze. A mix of exhaustion, perfume, and jet fuel. Business travelers shuffled in lines, half awake, their boarding passes glowing on phone screens. Among them walked Zuri Mbaye, a thin, dark-skinned girl with neat braids pulled into a bun and a silver bracelet on her wrist engraved with a single word: dignity. Zuri carried herself like someone used to airports, steady, polite, and oddly calm for 13. She wasn't a typical passenger. This flight to Accra was her 10th of the year. Her uniform gray travel coat looked simple, but anyone who noticed the stitching would recognize couture. Still, she moved quietly, almost invisible, because that's how her mother had taught her to travel, with grace, not noise. As she reached gate 42, her phone buzzed. A message from Mama. "Board safe, my love. Text me when you land. Remember, confidence doesn't mean arrogance." Zuri smiled. Her mother, Aisha Mbaye, wasn't just any mom sending sweet reminders. She was the founder and CEO of Sahel Tel, a tech telecom empire recently valued at over £11 billion after its London IPO. People called her the mother of African connectivity. But to Zuri, she was simply Mom, the woman who always said the same thing before every flight. "You belong anywhere your ticket takes you." Zuri tucked the phone away, her boarding pass between her fingers. SkyTide Flight 904, Seat 2F, First Class. The attendant scanned it with a polite, "Have a wonderful flight, Miss Mbaye." Walking down the jet bridge, Zuri felt that familiar mix of excitement and calm, the quiet hum before takeoff. She loved that sound, the steady, mechanical breathing of engines, the symphony of travel. Inside the cabin, the first-class section smelled of leather and citrus cleaning spray. Only 8 seats, each framed by pale gold lighting. She found her row, 2F by the window, and paused. Someone was already there. A man in his 50s, pale, graying, expensive suit slightly rumpled from overnight travel, sat sprawled across her seat. His phone glowed blue against his cufflinks. He didn't even glance up. Zuri hesitated, checked her pass again, then tried a polite smile. "Excuse me, sir. I think this might be my seat. 2F. The man sighed without looking away from his screen. "No, sweetheart," he muttered. "You must be mistaken. First class is assigned seating." She blinked, unsure if he'd even heard her properly. "Yes, sir. That's why I said 2F. It's printed here." She held up the boarding pass, her hand steady. He finally looked at her, eyes scanning her face, then her jacket, then her small hands. The smile he gave wasn't friendly. It was that thin, knowing smile people give when they've already decided who you are. "Look, kid," he said, waving his phone like a teacher correcting a student. "You must have wandered up here by accident. Economy's that way." He jerked his thumb toward the curtain. A few passengers turned their heads. The air seemed to tighten. Zuri's chest warmed, not from embarrassment, but from something sharper. Disbelief. "No, sir," she answered softly. "I'm supposed to be here." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "Sure you are." The laughter carried, not loud, but enough for others to hear. It spread like static. Someone coughed. Someone else looked down at their tablet, pretending not to notice. Zuri could feel the familiar sting of eyes judging before facts. She had seen it before. Hotel lobbies, business lounges, Anywhere people saw her skin first and her story second. Her father used to say, "Prejudice is lazy thinking. They'll realize who you are eventually." But right now, that eventually felt very far away. She drew in a slow breath, remembering Mama's rule. Never raise your voice before the world is ready to listen. Zuri stepped slightly aside, waiting for a flight attendant to appear. Her pulse was steady. She'd practiced calm the way others practiced piano. The man, Henry Whitmore, as the name tag on his briefcase read, leaned back, scrolling. "These kids," he muttered, "always think rules don't apply." The words cut more than he knew. A moment later, the sound of heels clicked down the aisle. A woman in a crisp Navy uniform, Flight Attendant Sophie Lang, appeared with the kind of smile that looked trained, not kind. "Is everything all right here?" Whitmore gestured lazily. "This young lady's confused. She's trying to take someone else's seat." Lang turned to Zuri. The smile stayed, but the tone sharpened. "May I see your boarding pass, sweetheart?" Zuri handed it over. Lang studied it for a long moment, frowning, not because it was wrong, but because it was right. She looked back at Whitmore, then at Zuri again. That's odd," Lang said. "Sometimes children are seated with guardians in economy. Maybe there was a mix-up. Let me check." Her voice was light, but her body blocked the aisle. Subtly, like a gate closing. Zuri wanted to protest, to say there's no mistake, but she bit her tongue. She'd seen how people reacted when kids sounded too sure. Whitmore smirked. "Told you, kid." Lang's radio crackled faintly in her ear. She lowered her voice. "Until we clear this up, could you wait back there by the curtain? It'll just take a minute." Passengers watched, not openly, but enough. The kind of watching that hurts because it hides behind silence. Zuri's fingers tightened around her small suitcase. The word on her bracelet caught the light again. Dignity. She turned, stepping toward the curtain as instructed. But in that small, measured walk, something inside her hardened. She wasn't going to cry. She wasn't going to beg. She would remember every face that looked away. As she stopped at the edge of the aisle, the camera lingered on her reflection in the window. A child surrounded by luxury she'd paid for, yet denied by assumption. "You belong anywhere your ticket takes you," her mother's voice echoed in her mind. Zuri looked down at her boarding pass, then at the seat number glowing faintly on the overhead screen. 2F. And for the first time, she felt a quiet fire. Not rage, not helplessness. Just the beginning of resolve. Because not every act of justice needs anger. Some begin with silence, and in that silence, a story was taking shape. One that the world would soon remember among its most powerful revenge stories. Though the revenge here would not come from hate, but from law. Fade out to the hum of engines starting. First class smelled like lemon oil and quiet money. Soft light trimmed each pod as if the cabin itself had been ironed. Zuri paused at row 2. Her boarding pass warm in her palm. 2F, window. The seat she'd picked because she liked to watch the wing flex at takeoff. A man already occupied it. He had the look of a lifetime of lounges, salt and pepper hair, tailored suit, jaw set like a permanent verdict. His briefcase, H. Whitmore engraved in brass, rested on the ottoman where Zuri's backpack should go. He didn't glance up. "Excuse me, sir," Zuri said softly. "I think that's my seat." 2F. Whitmore's thumb kept moving across his phone. "No, sweetheart." The word landed like a pat on the head. He flicked his eyes at her and back to the screen. "You must be mixed up. These are assigned." "That's what I mean," Zuri said, lifting her boarding pass so the 2F shone under the reading light. Her voice was steady. The bracelet on her wrist caught a line of gold. He gave a quick, dry laugh. "Look, I've flown this route for 20 years. They don't put unaccompanied kids here. Check with your parents, all right? Economy is through the curtain." The curtain. The back. The place people like him thought she should disappear to. Zuri felt heat rise behind her ribs, then pushed it down. Mama called it the second breath, The one you take before you decide who you're going to be. I bought this seat, sir, she said. Careful, calm. 2F is printed here. He finally looked at the ticket. No, not at the ticket. At her small frame, her brown skin, the simple coat. The assessing pause wasn't long, but it was enough to draw a radius of attention from nearby pods. A woman across the aisle lowered her magazine. A young couple in 1D1F went still. Cute, Whitmore murmured, smile thin. But there are rules up here. Right, Zuri said. That's why I have a boarding pass. He set his phone down, the corner of it clicking against the armrest like a gavel. Sweetheart, you can't just wander into first class and claim a seat because you like the window. Something inside Zuri dipped and then steadied, like an airplane hitting air and finding lift again. She thought of Mama's last text. Confidence doesn't mean arrogance. She turned the pass so the name was clear. My name is Zuri Mbaye, 2F. The name landed. A few passengers blinked as if they recognized it and were trying not to. Whitmore didn't. He leaned forward, forearms on the armrest, a lecture forming. Listen, he said, voice pitched for the row. There are processes, seating, status. You can't upset the system just because it feels unfair to you. That's not how the world works. The word unfair bloomed like a bruise. Zuri kept her face neutral. It feels like someone is in my seat. A flight attendant appeared, the same woman from before, navy uniform perfect, smile pressed into place. Is everything all right? She asked, eyes floating past Zuri before settling on Whitmore as if drawn by gravity. This young lady's confused, Whitmore said easily. She's trying to sit here. May I see your boarding pass, miss? The attendant asked Zuri, not Whitmore. Zuri handed it over. The attendant scanned the QR code, frowned, then glanced at Whitmore. Sometimes our system seats minors with guardians, she said lightly. There may have been a reassignment. Zuri felt the sentence try to slide her out of place like a tray table. I'm assigned to 2F, she said, almost a whisper, but lined with steel. We'll sort it out, the attendant replied. Could you wait by the curtain just for a moment? The woman across the aisle shifted. Maybe check both passes, she suggested, voice careful. Whitmore spread his hands. I don't have to prove anything. I'm Platinum Elite. They know me. The attendant hesitated half a heartbeat, long enough to mean something, short enough to deny it later. Sir, if you have your pass handy. I boarded first, he said, as if that settled law. A man in row 3 angled his phone upright. Casual, not quite recording. The couple in 1D1F traded looks. Zuri could hear the engine hum outside, eager to roll, and felt the tiny clock inside her body start counting seconds. The kind of seconds that decide whether something becomes a story or just another private wound. Miss? The attendant prompted. Zuri stepped back a half pace, but didn't yield the row. She looked at the seat number glowing on the bulkhead. 2F. She looked at the polished leather, the blanket folded like a promise. Then she looked at the eyes watching and not wanting to be seen watching. Why is it easier to move me than to ask him to show his pass? Zuri asked, level, not loud. The question slid into the aisle and sat there. The attendant's smile thinned. We're trying to avoid a disturbance. There wasn't one, Zuri said, until someone sat in my seat and refused to move. Whitmore chuckled, low. Hear that? My seat. He tilted his head toward the curtain. Run along, kid. They'll get you sorted. Zuri's fingers found her bracelet. Dignity. The metal was cool and certain. She thought of every lobby where someone had pretended not to see her until they saw her mother's name. She thought of every time eventually came too late to matter. Please, the attendant said, that practiced patience fraying. We're on a schedule. Zuri nodded once. So am I. She took the smallest step closer to the armrest, enough to mark the border of what was hers without crossing it. Her voice softened, and somehow it made the words harder. All I'm asking is that you check both tickets. That's the rule, isn't it? Silence laid over the row. For a moment, The aircraft seemed to hold its breath with her. The attendant's radio crackled. A whisper from the galley. She glanced at Whitmore, then back at Zuri, then at the growing ring of attention pressing in from the edges. Zuri didn't move. She didn't plead. She didn't lower her eyes. 2F, she said, as if reading coordinates. That's me. The flight attendant's smile never faltered, but something in her eyes shifted, a flicker of annoyance, maybe discomfort. To the other passengers, it probably looked like she was keeping things under control, but Zuri could feel it. The kind of look adults gave when they'd already decided who was right and who wasn't. "Let's not make a scene, all right?" the attendant said in a tone that pretended to be gentle. "It's just a mix-up. A mix-up." That word again. The polite way people erased the truth. Zuri knew she hadn't mixed anything up. The boarding pass in her hand still read Seat 2F, First Class. Printed, paid, perfect. Whitmore folded his arms, relaxing into the seat like a king who'd reclaimed his throne. "See?" he said, loud enough for the nearby passengers to hear. "No harm done. She can move back now." Zuri's chest tightened. Every instinct told her to stay silent, to do what she'd been taught all her life. Stay polite, stay calm, stay safe. But silence felt heavier this time. She glanced at the flight attendant's name tag, S. Lang, and said carefully, "Ma'am, with respect, you haven't checked his boarding pass yet." Lang's jaw twitched. "Sir, could I just verify?" "I told you," Whitmore interrupted. "I'm a Platinum Elite member. I fly this route every week. They know me at SkyTide." Lang's tone softened toward him in an instant. "Of course, sir. I'm sure this is just an oversight." Then, turning back to Zuri, her voice cooled. "We have to prioritize passengers who are properly documented." Properly documented. The words landed sharp as glass. Zuri's ticket was literally in Lang's hand. Still, Lang spoke to her like she was a stowaway who'd snuck in for a photo op. "I am properly documented," Zuri said, quiet but firm. "You can scan the QR code again." Lang sighed, the sigh of someone forced to entertain nonsense. "Sweetheart, I'm not saying you did anything wrong, but maybe the system just didn't recognize your name." Across the aisle, a woman whispered to her husband. "Unbelievable." The husband shook his head, murmuring, "Don't get involved." Zuri caught fragments of it. Don't get involved. The motto of every bystander. Lang straightened, trying to end the conversation. "Why don't you come with me for a moment? We'll find you another seat up front if one's open." "That's not necessary," Zuri said. "I just want the seat I paid for." Whitmore chuckled. "You paid for it? That's a good one." Lang turned sharply. "Sir, please." But the way she said it, gently, almost apologetic, made it clear who she thought was worth calming. Zuri's throat tightened. Not with tears. She refused to cry here. But with that familiar ache of being disbelieved. Every rule, every ounce of evidence was on her side. Still, she was the one being asked to move. Lang glanced toward the front of the cabin, clearly hoping a senior crew member might step in. None did. She sighed again and said, "Look, I don't want to involve security. Let's just fix this quietly, all right?" Security. That word pulsed in Zuri's ears, as if she were a threat. Her mind flashed back to Mama's lessons about negotiation. You don't win arguments by being louder. You win by being right, and patient enough to prove it. So Zuri stayed still. "If you're going to involve security," she said softly, "then please call them, because I haven't done anything wrong." That line, calm, almost too calm, made the air shift. Several heads turned. Someone pulled out a phone, pretending to scroll but really recording. Lang hesitated, now aware that eyes were watching. For a heartbeat, she looked uncertain. Then, defaulting to habit, she smiled again. That corporate smile that said nothing personal, just procedure. "Fine," she said tightly. "Stay here for now, but don't block the aisle." She turned away, heels clicking against the floor, muttering something into her radio. Zuri sat down in the empty aisle seat beside 2F. Not her rightful one, but close enough to make a point. She could feel Whitmore's irritation radiating like heat. He shifted in the seat that wasn't his, pretending victory. Outside the window, the engines began to spin up. The plane trembled slightly, ready for takeoff. Zuri stared at the faint reflection of her own face, calm, still, but carved with quiet fury. This wasn't just about a seat anymore. It was about how quickly people chose sides without facts. How power, even a small, temporary kind like a uniform or a status card, made people forget fairness. She whispered to herself, "They'll see, eventually." The hum of the aircraft swallowed her words, but not her resolve. Somewhere in the back of her mind, the story had already changed shape. It wasn't about a man stealing her seat anymore. It was about a system stealing her dignity. And Zuri, calm as ever, intended to take it back. The cabin lights dimmed as boarding finished. Conversations quieted into the soft shuffle of seatbelts and zippers. Zuri sat rigid in the wrong seat, the aisle beside 2F, her boarding pass still between her fingers like a piece of fragile proof no one cared to see. The man in her seat, Henry Whitmore, reclined with the confidence of someone who'd already won. His glass of orange juice gleamed under the cabin light, his smirk reflected in it. Every few minutes, he would glance at her, not directly, but with that sideways look adults used when they wanted to remind you of your place. Across the aisle, the woman with the magazine caught Zuri's eyes and mouthed something that looked like, "I'm sorry." Zuri gave a small nod. She didn't blame the woman. Not really. Most people here weren't cruel, just comfortable. And comfort made cowards of the best of them. The intercom crackled. "Cabin crew, prepare for takeoff." Zuri's heart pounded. She'd been here before, not in this exact moment, but in that same space between injustice and action. She thought of the times her mother had been ignored at hotel counters, of reporters who asked if her father's success was luck or a surprise. The quiet humiliations that came wrapped in politeness, her bracelet, dignity, pressed into her wrist like a reminder. The plane began to taxi, wheels rolling over concrete. The vibration hummed through the floor. Zuri closed her eyes, breathing slowly. She could wait. Her mother always said the right kind of silence could shake louder than shouting. But then, the attendant returned. Sophie Lang knelt slightly beside Zuri's seat, smile fixed. "Miss Mbaye," she said, voice dipped in false concern. "We spoke with the gate agents. There's been a little confusion. They're verifying your ticket now. It'll just take a moment." Zuri opened her eyes. "You've already scanned it." "Yes, but sometimes the system—" "The system is fine," Zuri interrupted, calm. "It's the people using it who make mistakes." Lang's smile stiffened. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Look, I'm trying to help you. Don't make this harder than it has to be." "By sitting in the seat I paid for?" Zuri asked. Lang exhaled, straightening. "You're very mature, I'll give you that. But this isn't helping anyone. Why don't you let me move you to another section until we sort things out?" Zuri looked up at her, not blinking. "Why don't you ask him to move?" The question hung in the air, soft but electric. Whitmore's smirk faltered. A few passengers turned their heads again, sensing something important but not wanting to be caught caring. Lang's voice sharpened. "Because Miss Mbaye, he's not the one making a scene." That did it. A ripple went through the cabin. A cough here, a shifting foot there, the language of discomfort. Zuri swallowed the sting in her chest. She wasn't crying. Not here. Not now. "You're right," she said. "He's not making a scene. He's making a point, and you're helping him prove it." Lang froze. For a second, her face lost that professional mask, replaced by something raw and defensive. Then it vanished. "Enough," she said curtly. "Either you move to another seat, or I'll have to call ground security when we return to gate." "Return to gate?" Whitmore scoffed. "For what? A kid who doesn't know her place." Lang shot him a look that said, "Please, not now," but she didn't correct him. Zuri's voice lowered. I know exactly where my place is. It's 2F. The cabin fell completely silent. The engines idled. The hum of air conditioning was suddenly the only sound. And then came the voice from the cockpit. Flight crew, please stand by. We're pausing our taxi. Ground control has requested we hold position. Lang's brow furrowed. She touched her earpiece. Captain? There's a ticketing verification issue, came the reply. We're getting a call from headquarters. Whitmore turned in his seat, frowning. Headquarters? For what? Zuri said nothing. But inside, her pulse shifted from fear to something steadier, anticipation. Lang stepped away to speak into her radio. Passengers whispered now. Phones tilted in subtle recording angles. The woman across the aisle wasn't pretending to read anymore. She was watching openly. After a minute, Lang returned, her posture tighter, her voice less certain. Miss Mbaye, she said. Who booked your ticket? My mother, Zuri replied. Aisha Mbaye. Lang froze. Her lips parted, eyes darting between Zuri and her tablet. The CEO of Saheltel? Yes, Zuri said simply, and the majority shareholder of SkyTide Airways. Gasps rippled through the cabin like a wave. Whitmore's face drained of color. He looked from Zuri to the attendant and back again, as if trying to find a version of reality that still made sense. Lang's tablet buzzed. A new message flashed across it. Hold position. Do not depart. Executive order. Zuri sat perfectly still, her hands folded over the boarding pass. Whitmore stammered. This is some kind of misunderstanding. No, Zuri said quietly, not to him, but to the air between them. It's exactly what it looks like. Lang's radio crackled again. A deep male voice, the captain, said carefully, Cabin crew, we've received confirmation. Passenger Zuri Mbaye is to remain seated in 2F. Flight is grounded pending investigation. The words fell heavy and absolute. Whitmore's mouth opened, then closed. He looked trapped, in his own arrogance, in the quiet justice that had just arrived without warning. Zuri rose from the aisle seat, smoothed her coat, and stepped toward her rightful place. Lang moved aside instinctively. When Zuri sat down in 2F, the cabin exhaled. The engines, once roaring, were now a low hum of apology. For the first time, Zuri looked out the window and allowed herself a small, tired smile. Because justice didn't need to shout. Sometimes, it just needed a voice that refused to shrink. And this time, silence had grounded the flight. The plane was still. Engines off, cabin lights dimmed. The air thick with tension and whispers. Passengers glanced between their phones and each other, unsure if they were witnessing a misunderstanding or something historic. Zuri sat in seat 2F, finally where she belonged, but the victory felt hollow. She wasn't celebrating, not yet. Her heart beat with quiet fury, not relief. The humiliation had happened in front of everyone, and even though she'd been proven right, the wound of being doubted still stung. Across the aisle, Henry Whitmore looked small now. His confidence had evaporated, replaced by a pale, uneasy silence. He clutched his phone as though it might save him from what came next. Every few seconds he'd open his mouth as if to apologize, but the words wouldn't come. Zuri turned her gaze toward the front of the cabin. Flight attendant Sophie Lang stood near the galley, speaking in sharp whispers into her radio, eyes darting toward Zuri. The other crew members avoided looking her way entirely. Then the captain's voice came over the intercom. Calm, but heavy. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a brief delay. Please remain seated while we resolve a matter of passenger documentation. We appreciate your patience. Zuri exhaled through her nose. Passenger documentation. That phrase again. It turned a clear injustice into bureaucracy. A delay, not a disgrace. Her phone buzzed on the tray table. Mom. Zuri picked it up instantly. Mama? Aisha Mbaye's voice came through, calm and commanding, the way it always was during crises. I just received a call from SkyTide headquarters. They said the flight you're on has been grounded. Are you all right? Zuri hesitated. I'm fine. But they didn't believe me, Mama, not even when I showed the ticket. There was a pause, then a sharp inhale. Not of surprise, but of anger she kept under control. What exactly happened? Zuri explained everything. The stolen seat, the laughter, the flight attendant's condescension, the way everyone had looked away. When she finished, her mother's voice was colder, quieter. Put me on speaker. Zuri hesitated, glancing around. Mama. Now, Zuri. She did as told. The phone's speaker filled the first-class cabin with a steady, confident tone that silenced every whisper. Good evening, passengers of SkyTide Flight 904. This is Aisha Mbaye. I believe there has been a very serious misunderstanding. The name hit like thunder. Heads snapped toward Zuri. Several passengers gasped. A few even lowered their phones, realizing they were filming something much larger than a viral clip. Whitmore's jaw dropped. You're her mother? He stammered. Zuri didn't answer. She just looked at him, calm, unmoving, the way her mother would have. Captain, Aisha continued, I understand this aircraft has been delayed for verification. You are speaking to the chairwoman of the Sahel Tel Group, and, incidentally, the majority shareholder of SkyTide Airways. I would like to know why my daughter, a paying first-class passenger, was treated as if she didn't belong. The intercom clicked as the captain's voice came back, respectful now, trembling slightly. Ms. Mbaye, my sincerest apologies. We were unaware. That's the point, Aisha interrupted. You shouldn't need to know who she is to treat her properly. Zuri watched Lang's face drain of color. The attendant's hands fidgeted at her sides, fingers twitching against her uniform. Whitmore's eyes darted to the floor. I will be speaking with the airline board directly, Aisha continued. But for now, I need this aircraft returned to the gate. My daughter will not sit another minute in a place that allowed prejudice to masquerade as policy. The captain hesitated. Understood, ma'am. A low murmur spread through the cabin. Disbelief, awe, quiet shame. The engines powered down completely. Outside, the faint glow of airport vehicles began moving toward them. Lang finally spoke, her voice trembling. Ms. Mbaye, please. I assure you, none of this was intentional. There must have been some confusion. Aisha's tone didn't rise. It didn't have to. Confusion? My daughter's boarding pass was scanned, verified, and ignored. Your employee dismissed her and threatened to call security while a stranger occupied her seat. That's not confusion. That's discrimination. Lang's eyes filled with tears. I didn't mean to. Meaning doesn't erase impact, Aisha said firmly. Zuri, are you all right? Zuri's voice was steady. I'm okay, Mama. Good. Stay seated. Don't say another word. You've done nothing wrong. The phone went quiet for a moment, and then Aisha's voice returned, colder, deliberate. Captain, please note this incident for the record. This flight and everyone responsible for its handling is under review by the company's executive board. You may resume communication with ground control. Security will meet you at the gate. Whitmore slumped in his seat, muttering under his breath. I didn't know who she was. Zuri turned to him, her expression calm but unyielding. You shouldn't need to. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Outside, flashing blue lights illuminated the tarmac. The jet bridge was rolling back toward the plane. The captain's voice broke the silence one last time. Ladies and gentlemen, we are returning to the gate. Please remain seated. The passengers began to whisper again, but this time it wasn't idle gossip. It was moral calculation. They knew what they had seen. They knew what it meant. Zuri looked down at her phone. Her reflection stared back at her, older somehow, stronger. She whispered under her breath, You told me to stay calm. I did. The engines hummed lower as the plane began to turn. Somewhere deep in the airport, people were already making calls. Managers, lawyers, press officers. A single act of prejudice had triggered a chain reaction that would ripple far beyond this cabin. Zuri wasn't smiling. She didn't feel triumphant. just steady, certain. She reached for the window shade and pulled it halfway down, muttering to herself, "Justice isn't loud, but it lands." And as the aircraft rolled back toward the terminal, the passengers of Flight 904 sat in silence, each of them realizing they had just witnessed what happens when quiet power finally speaks. The plane rolled back toward the terminal, its engines humming with restrained power. Nobody spoke now. The cabin that once buzzed with quiet arrogance had turned into a courtroom in the sky, and Zuri Mbaye, 13 years old, sat in the center of it, small but unshaken. Outside her window, amber lights flashed across the tarmac. Airport security vehicles waited by the gate, their headlights cutting long shadows through the mist. Zuri could see the silhouettes of people gathering near the jet bridge, airline officials, maybe journalists already tipped off by SkyTide's internal system. Inside the cabin, every second stretched. Passengers whispered in fragments. "That's her mother? Did she really ground the flight?" Unbelievable. Zuri didn't answer any of it. She sat still, one hand resting on her silver bracelet, the other tracing the corner of her boarding pass. The paper was crumpled now, evidence of how many times she'd had to prove what was already hers. Sophie Lang, the flight attendant, lingered by the galley with pale cheeks and trembling hands. She had stopped pretending confidence. Now she just looked scared. The man in 2F, her seat, had wilted completely. Henry Whitmore's shoulders sagged, his expensive watch glinting under the overhead light as if mocking him. Then came the voice over the intercom. Calm, professional, final. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We have returned to the gate for security and compliance reasons. Please remain seated until instructed." A collective breath rippled through the cabin. Moments later, the sound of the jet bridge locking onto the door echoed like the gavel of justice itself. The front cabin door opened. Cold air swept in. Brisk, cleansing. 2 airport security officers entered first. Behind them came a woman in a tailored navy suit, a SkyTide executive by the looks of her, and 2 men carrying tablets. Their faces were serious, rehearsed for crisis. "Good evening," the woman said, voice clipped but calm. "My name is Evelyn Ross, Director of Passenger Relations for SkyTide Airways. We're here to address the reported incident." Her eyes scanned the cabin. They landed on Zuri first. Recognition flickered there, followed by visible discomfort. "Miss Mbaye," she said softly, "we're deeply sorry this has happened to you." Zuri nodded once. "Thank you," she said quietly. Ross turned to Lang. "Flight Attendant Lang, please step forward." Lang's hands shook as she unclipped her belt and stood. Her voice cracked. "Ma'am, there was confusion about seating. I didn't—" Ross raised a hand. "Not now." Her tone was surgical. "You'll have a chance to explain later. For now, please step aside." Then she turned to Whitmore. "Mr. Whitmore, correct?" He nodded stiffly. "Yes, look, this is all a misunderstanding." Ross didn't let him finish. "Mr. Whitmore, do you deny that you refused to show your boarding pass when requested?" He swallowed. "I didn't think it was necessary. I've flown this route for years. Everyone knows—" "Knows what?" she asked sharply. Whitmore faltered. His lips parted, but no words came out. The silence was heavier than anything he could have said. Ross straightened, gesturing to the officers. "Escort Mr. Whitmore off the aircraft, please." He tried to protest. "You can't! This is ridiculous! I didn't do anything wrong!" The older of the 2 officers leaned down. "Sir, you're being removed for creating a discriminatory and unsafe environment on a commercial flight. You can cooperate, or we can make it official." The passengers watched in silence as Henry Whitmore gathered his things with shaking hands. He glanced once at Zuri, his expression a blur of fear, guilt, and disbelief. For a moment, she almost pitied him. Almost. But then she remembered the laughter, the way he'd said, "You people don't belong here." As the officers guided him down the aisle, phones lifted in near-perfect unison. Clicks. Whirs. The age of accountability had cameras on standby. When the cabin door closed again, Evelyn Ross faced the passengers. On behalf of SkyTide Airways, I want to extend our sincerest apologies. This incident violates our core policies on equality and passenger dignity. Immediate disciplinary action is being taken. Lang's lip trembled. Ms. Ross, please. Ross cut her off. You may also deplane, Ms. Lang. Your suspension is effective immediately pending review. The younger flight attendants looked down at the floor, ashamed. Lang's voice cracked. I wasn't trying to be racist. I was trying to avoid conflict. Zuri spoke for the first time. Her voice was calm but piercing. You didn't avoid conflict. You chose a side. Lang froze, eyes filling with tears she didn't dare shed. Security escorted her out quietly. When the door closed again, silence lingered. Then, softly, someone in row 3 began to clap. Another joined. Within seconds, the entire first-class cabin was applauding. Not loudly, not theatrically, but with a quiet, deliberate rhythm that felt like closure. Zuri didn't join in. She just sat still, hands folded over her lap, the bracelet on her wrist glinting under the cabin light. Ross turned back to her. Miss Mbaye, your mother has been informed. She's waiting at the executive gate to meet you when we disembark. Zuri nodded. Thank you. As Ross moved away to speak to the captain, Zuri looked out the window again. The runway lights blurred through faint tears she hadn't realized she was holding back. Not from sadness, from release. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel everything she had kept buried. The fear of being humiliated, the anger of being underestimated, the exhaustion of constantly proving herself. Her mother had once said, "Power doesn't always roar, my love. Sometimes it's quiet, and that's why it lasts." Now she understood. Justice hadn't come with shouting or revenge. It had come with truth, professionalism, and the kind of power that didn't need to announce itself. As the last echoes of applause faded, Zuri looked down at her boarding pass one more time. She smoothed the crease with her thumb. Seat 2F, still hers, always hers. And for the first time since stepping onto Flight 904, she smiled. Not out of triumph, but because she finally believed in something her mother had always promised her. That dignity, when defended quietly but firmly, could move the world, or, in this case, ground it. When the cabin door opened again, the hum of the airport flooded in. Rolling suitcase wheels, distant chatter, the muffled voice of a gate agent paging another flight. Zuri sat motionless in her seat. The air inside the plane felt thinner now, like everyone was breathing carefully, afraid to disturb the fragile calm that had settled after the storm. Passengers began to gather their things in awkward silence. Nobody wanted to be the first to stand. They were all too aware that they had just witnessed something they would never forget, and perhaps never fully understand. A woman across the aisle leaned over and whispered, "You were brave." Zuri turned, offered a small smile. "I just told the truth." The woman nodded, but her eyes said something else, something like guilt or admiration, or both. The captain stepped out of the cockpit, hat in hand. His face was pale with the weight of corporate fear. "Miss Mbaye," he said, his voice steady but soft. "On behalf of the crew, I owe you an apology. What happened here should never occur on any flight, let alone ours." Zuri nodded politely, but she could tell he wasn't speaking just for himself. He was speaking for every person who looked away when they should have spoken up. "Thank you, Captain," she said. He hesitated. "Your mother is waiting at the private gate. Would you like an escort?" "I'll be fine," she said, her tone controlled, not arrogant, just certain. The captain nodded, clearly humbled, and returned to the cockpit. As the passengers began to file out, some stopped by Zuri's seat. A middle-aged man in a gray business suit said quietly, "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I should have said something earlier." Zuri's answer was simple. "It's worth a lot that you said it now." He swallowed hard, then walked away. Another woman, the one who had mouthed, "I'm sorry" earlier, reached out, placing a trembling hand on the seat beside Zuri. "You didn't deserve that. None of it. Zuri looked at her, eyes calm. No one does. When the last passenger stepped off, the plane was eerily quiet. Only Zuri remained seated, looking out the window. The tarmac glowed with pale orange light, reflecting off the aircraft's wing. She could see a cluster of black sedans parked near the gate. Her mother's car would be among them. She stood slowly, slinging her small backpack over one shoulder, and stepped into the aisle. Her footsteps sounded louder than they should have. As she approached the exit, Evelyn Ross, the sky-tide executive, waited by the door. Her expression was composed, but her posture was cautious, almost deferential. "Miss Mbaye," she said, "your mother has requested that you disembark first." Zuri nodded. "Thank you, Ms. Ross." Ross hesitated, then added quietly, "She's already on a call with our board. The company is taking this very seriously." Zuri met her eyes. "I hope it's not just about saving face." Ross blinked, caught off guard by the maturity in the girl's voice. "It's about doing the right thing," she said finally. Zuri gave a polite nod but didn't answer. She stepped past Ross and out into the cool jet bridge air. The private gate was bright, sterile, quiet, a strange contrast to the tension that had filled the plane. Her mother stood near the window, phone still pressed to her ear, voice low but fierce. When she saw Zuri, she ended the call mid-sentence. "Hold that thought," she said into the receiver. Then she turned, her expression softening instantly. Zuri didn't speak. She just walked into her mother's arms. The hug was silent, grounding. Mbaye pulled back slightly to look at her daughter's face. "You handled yourself perfectly," she said. "You stayed calm. You remembered who you are." Zuri nodded, her throat tight. "I tried, but Mama, it hurt, the way they looked at me, like I didn't belong." Aisha brushed a hand along her daughter's cheek. "I know," she said softly, "and that's exactly why you do belong, because you faced it and didn't let it break you." They stood in silence for a moment. Behind them, the sky-tide executives hovered nervously by the door, unsure whether to approach or stay invisible. Aisha turned, her eyes sharper now. "Ms. Ross," she said, "you can inform your CEO that I expect a full public statement, not tomorrow, tonight." Ross nodded immediately. "Of course, ma'am. We're preparing it now." "And the staff involved?" Aisha asked. "Suspended," Ross said quickly. "Pending investigation." Aisha gave a curt nod, then placed a hand on Zuri's shoulder. "Good, because this isn't about punishment. It's about precedent." Zuri looked up at her. "What happens now?" Her mother's expression softened again. "Now, we make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. sky-tide will review every bias training, every passenger protocol, and I'll make sure of it personally." Zuri exhaled, finally feeling the weight of the day lift a little. "Does that mean you're going to fire them?" Aisha smiled faintly. "No, sweetheart, I'm going to educate them first. Because reform lasts longer than revenge." Zuri nodded slowly. The words sank deep, fitting perfectly into the quiet power she'd learned to carry. Her mother looked toward the terminal, where a small group of journalists had begun gathering. "The story's already spreading," she said. "People are calling it the grounded flight incident. It's trending everywhere." Zuri winced a little. "I don't want to be famous for this." "You're not famous," Aisha said. "You're visible. There's a difference." They started walking toward the exit together, passing by Ross, who stood frozen, watching them go. As they approached the terminal doors, Aisha's phone buzzed again. She ignored it this time. Her arms stayed around Zuri's shoulders, steady and proud. Zuri looked up at her mother. "Mama, do you think people will ever stop judging others like that?" Aisha smiled sadly. "Maybe not completely, but every time someone like you refuses to shrink, they lose a little power." Zuri let the words settle as they stepped into the cool night air outside the terminal. The wind rustled through the edge of her coat, carrying the faint hum of engines and distant chatter. The world kept moving, but something about it felt slightly, irrevocably changed. She glanced back once toward the airplane, its lights still glowing against the dark runway. "Mama?" she said softly. "Yes?" Zuri's voice was steady now, almost serene. "I think the sky just learned a little humility tonight." Aisha looked down at her daughter, her eyes full of quiet pride. "And maybe," she said, "the world did too." They walked on, a mother and daughter framed by the glow of runway lights, leaving behind not just an airplane, but the echo of a lesson that would travel much farther than any flight ever could. They moved the meeting off the jet bridge and into a glass-walled conference room overlooking the gate. Night pooled against the windows. Runway lights blinked like patient metronomes. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and printer toner. A small sign on the door read, "Operations Debrief." It felt less like an office and more like a courtroom without a bench. Zuri sat beside her mother at the end of the table. Aisha's phone lay face down, the only surrender she'd made all evening. Across from them were Evelyn Ross from SkyTide, two company lawyers with open laptops, a uniformed airport security supervisor, and a representative from the Civil Aviation Authority, a tidy woman with a silver badge who introduced herself as Inspector Hale. A few minutes later, the woman from 1D slipped in, professor of aviation law, as it turned out, carrying her tablet like evidence. No one spoke for a long 5 seconds. Somewhere on the concourse, a vacuum cleaner whirred past like distant surf. Ross cleared her throat. "Thank you for coming," she began, voice composed but thin around the edges. "We're conducting a rapid response review of the incident aboard Flight 904. Our goal is to establish facts and immediate remedies, tonight." Aisha nodded once, an executive's permission to proceed. The older company lawyer tapped his keyboard. The wall monitor glowed to life with a time-stamped dashboard. Flight 904, cabin events. Rows of entries scrolled downward, boardings, seat assignments, crew actions. He zoomed into a block of activity around the time everything turned. "Please note log item 185216, he said. "Handheld device ID FA Lang 12 accessed the seat map and initiated a temporary reassignment on seat 2F. Zuri watched the cursor circle the line. The words looked clean, bloodless, like nothing more than maintenance. The professor from 1D quietly set her tablet on the table. "And at 185224, she said, "this is what the cabin heard." She pressed play. The room filled with Zuri's voice, small but steady. Article 3.2. Any denial of service based on appearance or race constitutes a violation punishable by immediate grounding. Even on a recording, the syllables had weight. The professor paused it there. The moment hung in the air like a held note. Inspector Hale scribbled something on a form. "Confirm for the record," she said, looking up. "The minor passenger read a relevant statute aloud before pushback completed?" "She did," the professor answered. "I filmed it. So did half the cabin." The younger company lawyer swallowed. "We're receiving those uploads now." Ross kept her eyes on Zuri, not the screen. "Miss Mbaye," she said softly, "I'm sorry you had to be the person enforcing our standards for us." Zuri didn't answer. Her hands were folded, fingers pressed lightly against the dignity bracelet as if she were aligning a compass. The older lawyer clicked to another log. 185301. Minor, unaccompanied, Miss Seated flag, added to passenger Mbaye, Z, by device FA Lang 12. That flag automatically cues a relocation prompt. He exhaled. It would have forced her out of 2F even if the system recognized the ticket. The action was manual. There it was, not confusion, a choice. Ross turned to the airport security supervisor. "Mr. Whitmore?" "Escort it off," he said. "We issued a conduct report and referred the file to the CAA. He's also received a civil trespass warning for refusing crew directions." Inspector Hale added, "And a preliminary 5-year carriage restriction recommendation is in motion pending our review." Silence, then. Not the awkward kind. Something cleaner. The sound you get after a broken cord finally resolves. The professor slid her tablet forward again. "There's one more clip," she said. The screen showed Henry Whitmore slouched in 2F, eyes cold, voice low enough to think it wouldn't carry. You people don't belong here. In the room, no one looked at Zuri. They looked at their hands, at the table, at anything else. Aisha's voice was calm. We're not here to destroy anyone, she said. We're here to make sure the system understands itself. Ross nodded, grateful for the line. Immediate actions, she said, glancing at her notes. 1. Sophie Lang is suspended pending termination review for misconduct and misuse of crew authority. 2. We are rolling out an urgent policy bulletin, effective tomorrow, requiring dual verification in any seating dispute. Both boarding passes, plus a real-time manifest check, no exceptions. 3. We're launching a Zero Bias Academy, 5-year program, mandatory for all customer-facing staff globally. The younger lawyer added, and we propose a formal apology, tonight, signed by our CEO, to Miss Mbaye and to all passengers. Aisha tilted her head toward Zuri. Your call, the gesture said. Zuri's voice when it came was gentle. Apologies are good, she said. But I don't want this to be about me. What would you like it to be about? Inspector Hale asked. About what happens next time, Zuri said. When it's not someone with a last name that makes people nervous. That landed. You could feel the room adjust to it. The airport supervisor checked his watch. We're also recommending a short gateside address, he said. Passengers are still nearby. People need to hear consequences, not rumors. Aisha looked to her daughter. You up for that? Zuri thought of the aisle, the window, the laugh. She nodded. Yes. They moved back toward the gate, a small procession under the fluorescent hush. A loose crowd had gathered. Passengers from 904, a handful of employees, a few curious travelers drawn by the gravity of something unusual. Phones rose like periscopes. Ross stepped to the small podium first. On behalf of SkyTide Airways, she began, we failed a passenger tonight. We failed to follow our own rules, and we allowed bias to masquerade as procedure. Effective immediately. She outlined the actions, the suspension, the dual verification rule, the academy. She did not say incident. She said harm. Inspector Hale followed, brief and precise. Civil Aviation has opened an inquiry. Evidence is secure. There will be public findings. The law is not optional at 30,000 feet or at the gate. Then the professor stepped forward, introduced herself by name and title, and did something academic and humane at once. She read back the statute Zuri had quoted and added context, why it existed, how it protected everyone, not just the person harmed. Finally, Ross looked to Zuri. Zuri didn't climb the podium. She stood beside it, ground level, where the passengers were. Her voice carried anyway. I'm not here to embarrass anyone, she said. I'm not even here to be brave. I just wanted to sit in the seat my ticket promised. A small ripple moved through the crowd. When someone told me I didn't belong, I used the only thing I had that everyone understands. Words in a rulebook. She glanced at the windows. A landing light drifted past like a slow star. I hope the next kid who shows a boarding pass doesn't need a crowd or a camera or a last name to be believed. I hope they just get their seat. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then applause. Low, respectful, growing. Not the viral kind, but the kind that fixes posture and memory. The sound filled the gate and bled softly into the concourse. As it faded, the airport supervisor leaned toward Ross. One more thing, he said, sotto voce but not secret. Ground told me your internal review found something else. Ross nodded. She faced the group again. For transparency, our audit shows a crew device manually flagged Miss Mbaye as misseated minor minutes before pushback. That action was improper. We are reporting it to regulators ourselves. People nodded, some with relief, some with shame. The truth had air. When it was over, the crowd thinned into clusters, then streams. The professor squeezed Zuri's shoulder in passing. For what it's worth, she said, that was the best recitation of Article 3.2 I've ever heard. Zuri smiled. I had a good reason. Back in the conference room, they signed a short, clean statement. Ross slid a printed copy across to Zuri. Would you like to approve the wording? Zuri scanned it, one line at a time. She pointed at a sentence near the end. This part, she said. We regret the inconvenience. Could you change inconvenience to harm? Ross didn't hesitate. She crossed it out with a pen and wrote harm in neat block letters. On the way out, Inspector Hale paused by the door. Miss Mbaye, she said. Most complaints arrive after the fact. Tonight, the law arrived with you. Zuri looked at her bracelet, at the one word she'd worn into every room that doubted her. It was already here, she said softly. Some people just needed to hear it. Morning came wrapped in silver light and headlines. Screens across terminals, cafes, and phones pulsed with the same breaking line. Flight attendant removes black teen from first class. Airline grounded by its own owner. Zuri's face wasn't in the pictures. Her mother had made sure of that. But the story had already become a symbol. The hashtags trended before breakfast. #flight no 4, #dignity seat, #quiet justice. At the Mbaye residence, sunlight filtered through tall glass walls, scattering across polished floors and travel souvenirs from places Zuri could name by heart. The TV murmured in the background as her mother, Aisha, sat at the kitchen island with a tablet in hand. The quiet rhythm of spoon on porcelain was the only sound until Zuri padded in, still in her oversized sweatshirt, hair tied back loosely. Morning, Mama. Morning, love, Aisha said, setting the tablet aside. You're trending in 12 countries. Zuri winced. That's not something I wanted to hear before breakfast. Her mother smiled faintly. I know, but you handled yourself perfectly. The world's just catching up to what happened. Zuri sat across from her, pouring cereal like someone trying to pretend life was normal. People online are making edits, she said quietly. Clips, captions, slow motion. Some of them are calling me a hero. Aisha reached over, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. You're not a hero, Zuri. You're a witness, and witnesses remind the world what it's capable of. Zuri looked down. They're also calling me privileged, saying if I wasn't your daughter, no one would care. That one stung deeper than the rest. Aisha took a breath, leaning back. They're half right. Many wouldn't have cared. But that's not your fault. It's the system's. The point isn't who you are, Zuri. The point is how many people saw themselves in your silence. Zuri nodded slowly. The cereal had gone soft in her bowl. The flight attendant, Ms. Lang. What'll happen to her? Internal review, Aisha said carefully. Training, not termination. I made that clear. Zuri looked up in surprise. You didn't fire her? No. A faint smile crossed her mother's lips. You don't cure blindness by closing eyes tighter. You open them. The doorbell chimed, a sound crisp enough to break the stillness. Aisha motioned for Zuri to stay seated and went to answer it. Moments later, Evelyn Ross stepped into the room, still in her navy sky-tied suit, looking exhausted but determined. Ms. Mbaye, thank you for seeing me in person, she began. You've done the right thing showing up, Aisha said, gesturing to the opposite stool. Ross hesitated before speaking. We're issuing the public statement today. The board voted unanimously to rename our ethical compliance charter. It'll be called the Mbaye Protocol. Zuri blinked. What? Ross smiled gently. Every cabin worldwide will have a section in the crew manual dedicated to your case. It's not a trophy, it's a reminder. Zuri didn't know what to say. She just nodded, a small, cautious nod. Ross continued, voice softening. And there's one more thing. Ms. Lang sent this. She placed a folded letter on the counter, the envelope marked only with Zuri. Zuri hesitated before opening it. The handwriting was shaky, but neat. Zuri, I don't expect forgiveness. What I did was more than a mistake. It was a mirror I didn't want to look into. You didn't deserve what happened, and you taught me what uniform training couldn't. That kindness means believing someone before policy tells you to. I'm starting the bias training next week. Because of you, I want to do it right this time. Sophie Lang. When Zuri looked up, Ross was gone. Her mother had slipped quietly out of the room too, giving her space. Only the sound of news anchors and distant traffic remained. She sat there for a while, the letter in her hands, staring out at the skyline that shimmered with morning haze. The world outside felt enormous again, wide, unpredictable, but somehow fairer than it had been yesterday. Her phone buzzed with another notification. BBC requests interview with Zuri Mbaye, then CNN, then Reuters. She sighed. When her mother returned, Zuri handed her the phone. Do I have to talk to them? Aisha studied her face. Only if you want to. But if you do, don't talk about pain. Talk about process. People forget that justice isn't magic. It's work. Zuri thought about that for a moment, then nodded. Maybe I'll do one interview, not to be famous, just so it doesn't happen again. Her mother smiled. Then we'll prepare together. Later that afternoon, the interview aired. Zuri sat beneath soft lights, her posture poised but human, her voice calm and unshaken. I don't hate anyone, she said when the journalist asked about Whitmore and the flight attendant. I just want people to understand that dignity isn't a privilege. It's a receipt. You pay for it every time you choose respect. That line would echo across platforms for days. People clipped it, quoted it, shared it. Teachers played it in classrooms. Lawyers cited it in diversity training. By evening, SkyTide's official statement had gone viral too. Passenger Zuri Mbaye reminded us that equality is not an announcement. It's an action. The Mbaye Protocol will ensure that no passenger ever again is denied their rightful seat. That night, after the interviews and the endless calls, Zuri sat on the balcony watching planes cross the horizon. The lights looked smaller now, quieter, like they were bowing in apology. Her mother joined her, 2 mugs of tea in hand. Long day, she said. Long couple of days, Zuri answered. They sat in silence for a while, the city humming beneath them. Mama? Yes, love? Do you think people will change? Aisha smiled faintly, eyes fixed on the sky. Change doesn't happen all at once, but it happens when someone refuses to look away. And that's what you did. Zuri leaned her head on her mother's shoulder. I didn't roar. No, Aisha said softly. You whispered, and the world listened. The night breeze brushed past them, carrying the faint sound of another plane taking off. Its engines rising like the quiet proof that justice, once grounded, was finally learning how to fly again. 3 weeks later, the world had moved on. At least, that's what the headlines suggested. New scandals, new viral moments, a new outrage cycle every morning. But inside SkyTide Airways, the echo of Flight 904 hadn't faded. It had changed things. Zuri didn't know that, of course, as she sat in her mother's office, flipping through a stack of letters that had arrived from strangers. Her mother's assistants had started sorting them by tone. Thank you, I'm sorry, you changed me. The desk overflowed with envelopes. She read one aloud, her voice small but steady. Dear Zuri, I work in customer service at a small airline in Texas. Last week, a little girl came up to first class with her grandma. The system had glitched and double assigned her seat. For a second, I almost told her to move. Then I remembered you. I checked twice instead. And I was wrong. It was her seat. Thank you for reminding me to slow down before I assume. Zuri smiled. That one's my favorite. Her mother looked up from her laptop, eyes warm. That's the one that matters. Change doesn't always start with power. It starts with pause. At SkyTide's headquarters downtown, a large banner now hung above the lobby. The Mbaye Protocol, grounded in dignity. The company had released a short training film, narrated in a calm, steady tone. It didn't show Zuri's face, but her voice, soft, certain, opened the video. Before you move someone from their seat, ask yourself why. If it's policy, check the policy. If it's bias, check yourself. The video went viral again, not for the outrage this time, but for its quiet truth. It became mandatory viewing in airports from London to Lagos. Back at home, Aisha's calendar overflowed. She had declined every media offer but accepted one invitation: a United Nations panel on systemic dignity in transport and technology. When the moderator introduced her, he began with a sentence that made the audience go still. Sometimes, accountability doesn't come from power. It comes from a 13-year-old who simply refused to move. Zuri watched from backstage, clutching her mother's phone. She didn't want to be on stage, not yet. But she listened. Every word, every pause. "We can't regulate human decency," Aisha told the crowd. "But we can design systems that demand it." The lesson from Flight 904 wasn't about a seat. It was about sight, the ability to see who's right in front of you. The applause that followed wasn't loud. It was long. Weeks later, Zuri was walking through Heathrow again. Same terminal, same windows, same light filtering across polished floors. But everything felt different. Her mother was on another flight that day, and Zuri was traveling with an assistant, quietly, without attention. At the check-in counter, a new SkyTide employee smiled at her boarding pass. "Ah, the Mbaye Protocol passenger," she said softly, like a secret. Zuri blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means we double-check everything now," the woman said with a grin. "Because one girl made the world do better." Zuri smiled back, her heart warm in that quiet, rare way that doesn't feel like victory but like balance restored. When she boarded, she noticed small things: the crew greeting every passenger by name, a short poster in the galley that read, "Dignity is policy," and the subtle, careful tone that made every traveler feel seen. She took her seat, window row 2 again, 2F, and stared out at the runway stretching endlessly ahead. The engines rumbled. The plane lifted. 2 months later, her mother handed her a small box wrapped in silver paper. "What's this?" Zuri asked. "Something that belongs to you," her mother said. Inside was a gold pin, shaped like a pair of wings. Etched across them was one word: dignity. "It's the first honorary SkyTide crew pin," Aisha said. "They're giving them to employees who complete the new ethics training. They wanted you to have the prototype." Zuri turned it in her hand, the metal catching the morning light. "It's beautiful." "It's yours," her mother said. "You earned it." Zuri looked up, thoughtful. "I didn't fix the system, Mama." Her mother smiled. "You didn't have to. You reminded it that it was broken, and that's where fixing begins." That evening, Zuri sat by the window of her room, city lights flickering far below. Her tablet glowed with another headline: "Airline bias policy now adopted by 2 more carriers. The Mbaye effect expands." She scrolled past the news, past the comments, until she found a short video. It showed a little girl, maybe 7, sitting in an airplane seat, grinning shyly at her mother filming. The caption read, "She said this seat belongs to her, and this time, everyone believed her." Zuri smiled to herself, whispered the words like a quiet mantra. Everyone believed her. She reached up and touched the dignity pin resting on her sweater, the same way she used to touch her bracelet. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like she was carrying a story. She felt like she had set one free. Outside her window, another plane climbed into the night sky, steady, sure, glowing faintly against the stars. And in that moment, Zuri finally understood what her mother had meant. Justice didn't need to roar, didn't need applause or fame. It just needed to stay airborne, long enough for others to follow. The auditorium was silent before the lights even dimmed. Rows of students, reporters, and airline executives filled every seat, murmuring in the kind of hush that precedes a moment that feels permanent. A banner above the stage read, "The Mbaye Protocol Anniversary Forum, a year of dignity in motion." Zuri stood backstage, her pulse steady, her palms cool. The air smelled faintly of metal and microphones. Through the curtain slit, she could see her mother seated in the front row, talking quietly with Evelyn Ross and Inspector Hale. She wasn't the scared kid from Flight 904 anymore. She was 13 now, taller, still quiet, but with that quietness that makes people lean in, not look away. When the host called her name, the applause rose like a slow tide, warm, not wild. She walked out into the light, hair braided, dressed in a soft navy dress with a single gold pin on her chest. Dignity. The same one her mother had given her months ago. "Thank you," she began, voice clear. "I didn't expect to be here a year later, talking about something that started because someone thought I didn't belong in a seat I paid for." The audience shifted, some nodding, others folding hands over knees, the collective weight of recognition settling over them. "When it happened, I was angry," she continued. "Not loud angry, quiet angry. The kind of anger that feels like a stone you keep in your pocket. But I learned that anger can be used for repair if you hold it right." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the crowd. "I didn't want revenge. I wanted reform." The line landed like soft thunder. Cameras clicked. Journalists scribbled. Zuri looked down briefly, her tone softening. "Some people called it one of those revenge stories, but that's not what it was. It wasn't about punishing anyone. It was about reminding everyone what justice should look like when no one's watching." The words were simple, but her delivery, measured, honest, cut through the hall like a note perfectly on key. Behind her, the screen lit up with images. The old flight footage blurred for privacy, training sessions with new staff, and a new slogan that would become the airline's global campaign: "Respect before regulation." Zuri turned slightly toward it. "My mother always says power isn't in the noise. It's in the aftermath. What you build after the outrage ends." Her eyes found her mother in the front row, who smiled back. Not prideful, but calm, as if to say, "Yes, this is what we fought for." "I've learned," Zuri continued, "that systems don't change when people shout. They change when someone writes a rule that outlives them. That's what the Mbaye Protocol means to me, not a headline. A habit." She smiled faintly. "And habits change worlds." When she finished, the applause didn't come right away. It took a few seconds for the room to process her last line. Then it rose, not like clapping at a show, but like wind building behind glass. Evelyn Ross took the stage next. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "this young woman didn't just remind an airline how to behave. She reminded an entire industry how to see. Today, every SkyTide employee, over 60,000 people, has completed bias response certification. We've grounded 7 flights this year for violations before they became tragedies. And next year, our training will be adopted by 3 other carriers, all because one passenger refused to give up her seat." The audience erupted again, this time louder. Zuri stepped back, cheeks warming. She didn't like attention, but she understood now that this wasn't about her. It was about the proof that quiet power works. Later that night, after the event, Zuri and her mother walked along the river outside the conference center. The city lights shimmered across the water, and planes crossed the dark sky like tiny fireflies. Coming, going, constant. "Do you think it'll last?" Zuri asked softly. Her mother's eyes reflected the lights. "The rules will change again someday," she said. "But what you started, how you made people see, that's not something a policy can undo." Zuri nodded slowly. "Sometimes I wonder if I'd still have done it if Dad wasn't who he was." Aisha smiled faintly. "That's what makes you who you are. You didn't stand up because of power. You stood up because of principle." They stopped at the railing. The wind tugged at Zuri's hair. "I used to think justice was loud," she said. "Now I think it's more like gravity. You don't see it, but you feel it pulling everything back to balance." Her mother turned to her, studying her face. The same poise, the same quiet conviction that had silenced a plane once. "You're right," she said softly. "And that's why you scare people who think injustice can hide." They laughed, a shared warmth in the cool night. When they reached home, Zuri found a small box waiting on her desk. Inside was a note from Evelyn Ross. "To the girl who grounded the sky so others could fly freely again. Inside is the final prototype of the Dignity Badge. Starting next month, every flight attendant who completes reform training will wear one. Beneath the note was a small silver pin in the shape of open wings, with the initials ZEM engraved at the center. Zuri smiled, not pridefully, but peacefully. The weight of the metal in her palm felt familiar, like a full circle drawn quietly closed. She pinned it next to her gold dignity badge and looked at her reflection in the mirror. She didn't see the scared girl from that day. She saw someone who had learned that dignity doesn't need permission and that justice doesn't always roar. Outside, a plane climbed through the clouds. Zuri whispered under her breath, the same words she'd once said in a trembling voice on that flight. Everyone deserves to stay in their seat. And somewhere above the horizon, that truth kept flying, steady, unstoppable, and seen. It was the anniversary of Flight 904. The world had moved forward, as it always does, but a quiet ripple of remembrance passed through news feeds and terminals alike. SkyTide Airways released a short film that morning, just 45 seconds long, narrated by a calm, familiar voice. A year ago, the narrator said, a misunderstanding grounded a flight. But what rose from that moment wasn't outrage. It was reform. The screen faded to an image of a child's hand resting on an airplane armrest. Sunlight spilling through the oval window. Then a line appeared. Dignity is the ticket everyone deserves. Zuri watched the clip from her bedroom, curled up by the window as a soft rain slid down the glass. She didn't smile or cry. She just breathed, steady and thoughtful. It felt strange knowing that something so personal had become something so public, that her quiet stand had become policy, and that her name had become a word people quoted in meetings, classrooms, and training rooms around the world. Her mother knocked gently on the door before stepping in. "They've invited you," she said, "to the dedication at the airport." Zuri turned. "I don't know if I want to go. It feels weird, like I'm visiting a ghost of myself." Aisha smiled softly. "Maybe that's the point. Sometimes you have to meet your past so you can thank her for surviving." The terminal gleamed, polished to mirror brightness. A small crowd had gathered near Gate 12, the same gate where the incident had once unfolded. There was no press frenzy this time, no shouting or chaos, just quiet respect. At the center stood a new plaque, brushed steel against white marble. The inscription read, "The Mbaye Cites, Flight 904. In honor of those who remind us that dignity isn't a privilege, but a promise." Beside it, a single first-class seat had been installed, not for boarding, not for show. It was part of the terminal now. People could sit there, take pictures, or just rest before their flights. There were no ropes, no "do not touch" signs. Only an invitation. Sit, remember, see. Zuri stood in front of it, her reflection merging with the seat's leather and the glass wall behind it. A memory flickered. The laughter, the disbelief, the weight of strangers' stares. She could almost feel the tremor in her 12-year-old hands again. But then she remembered her own voice from that day. Not trembling, not breaking. Steady. Certain. A flight attendant, older now, wearing the silver dignity wings, approached. "Miss Mbaye," she said with a soft smile. "I trained under the new program. We all did. You changed how we see people." Zuri shook her hand. "No," she said gently. "You changed yourselves. I just held up the mirror." The woman's eyes misted. "Still, thank you." When the small ceremony began, Evelyn Ross spoke briefly, her voice firm but warm. "We grounded a flight that day," she said. "And in doing so, we grounded our arrogance. The sky doesn't belong to one kind of passenger. It belongs to everyone brave enough to take a seat." The audience applauded quietly. No one cheered. It wasn't that kind of moment. It was something more sacred, a moment of collective humility. Zuri's mother nudged her forward. "Say something," she whispered. Zuri hesitated, then stepped up to the small microphone. Her voice carried easily through the terminal, soft but resonant. "I was just trying to sit where I belonged," she said. "But I've learned something since then. Belonging isn't about a seat. It's about being seen. When someone denies your space, you can shout or you can show. I chose to show." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the crowd, passengers, staff, and even a few children holding their parents' hands. "I used to think justice was loud," she continued. "Now I know it's patient. It moves through people slowly, like air through wings. The real justice isn't that one flight was grounded. It's that hundreds now stay steady because we learned how to see." There was a hush after she finished. Then, one by one, people began to clap, slow, rhythmic, the kind of applause that feels like acknowledgement, not celebration. Zuri stepped back. Her mother was crying quietly, but smiling. The moment didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt complete. After the ceremony, Zuri wandered the concourse alone. Families bustled past, announcements echoed softly, and somewhere nearby, a toddler laughed. The ordinary sounds of travel, once sharp and anxious, now sounded peaceful. She stopped by a cafe window and watched a plane lift off into the pale sky. Its wings tilted slightly, catching sunlight as it climbed. Her phone buzzed. A notification. A message from the woman she once defended against. Sophie Lang. "I finished the final level of the Dignity Academy today. Thank you again, Zuri. You changed my job. And my heart." Zuri smiled. No resentment, no pride, just quiet closure. She typed back, "Then it was worth it." Hours later, at home, she sat again by her window as twilight painted the city gold. Her dignity pin caught the light, resting beside her old boarding pass from that day. Still creased, still fragile. She didn't frame it. She kept it as a reminder that change begins not with loudness, but with presence. Her mother entered, carrying 2 mugs of cocoa. "What are you thinking about?" Zuri turned the ticket in her hand. "That the world used to tell me to take my seat. Now it's learning to keep mine for me." Aisha smiled. "That's the difference between equality and dignity," she said. "Equality gives you the seat. Dignity makes sure no one takes it again." Zuri nodded, her eyes drifting to the horizon where another jet rose into the darkening sky. "It's funny," she whispered. "All this from one flight." Her mother looked at her, warmth in her eyes. "No, love, not from one flight, from one choice." Outside, the plane disappeared into the clouds, its light flickering like a heartbeat. A small, steady proof that sometimes the quietest battles leave the longest contrails. And for the first time since Flight 904, Zuri exhaled fully, knowing that the sky, like justice, finally belonged to everyone.